Welcome back to Lost Louisiana, What's in a Name Part 2. I'm your host, Charlie Whinham, coming to you from the State Museum in Baton Rouge. We are traveling around Louisiana to find out more about towns that made us wonder, how did they get their name? The next stop is an area named after the state of Iowa. This town was the creation of one man who masterminded a Louisiana land rush. And if you're taking notes, there are 3 keys to creating a land rush. First, get some land. Then, get yourself a few trains and a printing press. The name of the town is Iowa, if you're wondering, and this quiet farming community of 2,600 folks may be in southern Louisiana, but this area has deep Yankee roots. Joe Barry's great-grandmother came to Iowa from where else? Iowa. She is an ancestor of one of Iowa's first families to settle here.
They came from the state of Iowa. And they were some of the first that came here. Makes it very interesting to me to look back and when people say, Iowa, Louisiana, because they can't get over that. This was the first house built in the city of Iowa, Earl and Sarah Foster's house.
John Denison is a 5th-generation farmer with Yankee roots as well. His house sits where his grandfather's log cabin used to be.
My grandfather came out of North Woods of Minnesota and Canada in the mid-'80s and actually homesteaded.
The mid-'80s, the mid-1880s.
1880s,
yeah.
Right. 1880s, that's correct, 1880s. Followed the timber industry down here. At that time, Lake Charles, Louisiana was a major exporting town and had probably a dozen sawmills here on the lake and in the Lake Charles area. And he worked there and then homesteaded here and farmed rice, started farming rice and working at the sawmills and farmed rice after work and at night.
But to understand how Iowa got its name means learning about a man named J.B. Watkins and his dream of developing southwest Louisiana. With the help of Englishman H.G. Chalkley, Watkins bought up 1.5 million acres of land in southwest Louisiana. This huge mass of land would be known as the Watkins Purchase. The next part of his plan, he built a railroad from Alexandria to what would become Iowa. Next, he purchased a New York City paper called The American. Watkins brought the paper to Lake Charles. It is the current-day Lake Charles American Press. And according to McNeese State University's Dr. Joe Cash, that's when J.B. could advertise to the world to come to make a new life in Louisiana.
I have an example from 1895 of the advertising a trip to Lake Charles. And if you would buy a ticket to come to Lake Charles, he would give you all the routes and put you on the Watkins line from Alexandria to Lake Charles, of course to Iowa, and then on to Lake Charles. And if you didn't like it here and didn't decide to move here and stay, he gave you $2 to go home. To get home, and that might have done it in those days.
In fact, one of those families responding to the ads was Amanda and Granville Woolman. After living throughout the Midwest in Iowa, even Nebraska, they took a train from Julesburg, Colorado to this great new land. And back in 1905, they built a beautiful Victorian home in Lake Charles. It is now the home of Dr. Joe Cash.
And he used the newspaper to advertise it, and it was billed as the Other Eden to get away from the cold, dark, dreary days of the North.
Would your grandfather been one of those guys that answered J.B. Watkins' ad?
Yes, indeed. That's right. That's how he got down here. Sure did. J.B. Watkins advertised all over the Midwest about the wonderful soil and climate of the Iowa community. Even had plans of a deep water channel from the town of Iowa to the Gulf. That never materialized, but it did happen from Lake Charles.
Iowa is a very close-knit community, as this weekly gathering of the First Methodist Church quilters will attest. Betty Storer Mount is the great-granddaughter of the first postmaster and storekeeper, James Storer. Since 1990, they have made over 100 quilts, and still easily yarn some tales of this other Eden.
But I always refused to go in the stall that held the 2 mules, Jack and Jill, because they were contrary. And you never knew when they were going to nip you and when they were just going to scare the daylights out of you. But it was a good life.
And now that good life is getting marketed again. Where the Denison family once raised rice and cattle, some land will sprout a new crop of homes.
Cities expand, people want to get out in the country. We now presently have on the drawing boards a fairly large subdivision that we're going to call Prairie Crossing, because this is the crossing between the bayou land here on the river and the prairie, the high prairie land that the Midwesterners settled. We're going to have what we call mini farms, probably 3 to 5 acre plots of property for those that want to enjoy the kind of lifestyle that my family's had for over 100 years.
Back at Joe Barry's farmland, Iowa means time to come back and smell the roses, and to leave her hectic days as a Baton Rouge lobbyist with husband Lynn.
We came home after 40 years. My husband decided, he was a contractor, but he decided that he could raise sugarcane. So he called it turning the land upside down, because rice loves water, sugarcane hates water. So he did, and we now have about 800 acres of sugarcane.
And 3 generations of her family will live practically next door to the main house. She has named her farm Beulah Land after her mother.
And Beulah Land means heaven. And so Iowa, Beulah, it's all together. It's one can't go without the other.
So could a southern town named after northern people be heaven? No, it's Iowa.